Hi, so it's Bethany Bousfield doing her second assignment for Unit 1, Government and Policy. So I'm going to start with the first question, which is describe with examples the impact of government policies on different public services in relation to the policies that I was assigned, which was UK deterrent policy and the victims of crime policy. So to start with, I'm going to talk about the UK nuclear deterrent policy, which impacts the Navy tremendously but not so much the others. This is due to the Trident, which is our main nuclear deterrent. It consists of 4 Vanguard-class submarines which can carry up to 16 nuclear missiles, although in 2010 it was decided that they should only carry up to 8 in most circumstances, such as normal patrols. Although only one of these submarines patrols at a time, whilst another is in for maintenance, and the other 2 are going in for different manoeuvres together. The UK nuclear deterrent policy consists of 5 main principles, which are preventing attack, minimum deterrence, first use of nuclear weapons, collective security, weapons remain under political control at all times. But it needs to be in place so that Hiroshima and Nagasaki, their disasters, doesn't happen again as it did during World War II. Although it was different circumstances and America retaliated and didn't fire first, Japan did, obviously on Pearl Harbor, they didn't need to do it twice, so it's to put into place that doesn't happen again. Another reason why it's good that the government has the power is because this atomic weapon that was used on these places, Little Boy, it was known as, has a yield around 15 kilotons, which killed around 80,000 people instantly, not including those injured or killed afterwards. Whereas the warheads on these 4 submarines are around 100 kilotons each, which is 8 times more destructive as the Hiroshima disaster. Another policy is victims of crime, which mainly affects how the police force operates within convictions and how they separate the victim from the offender during the aftermath. During and before this policy was put into place, I felt that separation is necessary between the victim and their offender, as the outcome of the offender being sorry for what they've done or regretful in some cases doesn't happen, leaving the victim no better off than they started with. Also, if they feel that the offender is a danger to many, they could hurt their victim again, whether that be mentally or physically. But with this new policy in place, makes the victim able to request, so they are not automatically given it, to meet and talk with their offender. In many cases, they will also talk about how their life was affected by the incident, and if the victim is no longer with us, the family can request to speak to the person who murdered or accidentally murdered their son or daughter. It helps to get your questions answered, to get an apology in some cases. This is called restorative justice, and this is a main idea behind this policy. An example of this, which is very up to date, is about 18-year-old Elisa. So she was home alone when an intruder entered the premises. She locked herself in the bathroom and called the police immediately. The police caught the intruder, who was later found to be the son of her next-door neighbour Dean, climbing out of the window next to the bathroom. Not sure why he was there. So he was known for burglaries, and his parents feared that he'd entered for something worse, as he was heavily intoxicated with not only alcohol but drugs as well. And he doesn't remember the incident, which obviously is a bit more concerning. Elisa and her mother Ellen decided to go down the restorative route, as Ellen wanted to make sure that he knew what he'd done and that he was young and could change his actions and get his life in order. Otherwise he could end up the same situation as her brother. So this is very heartwarming and obviously hurtful for her. So her brother began offending at 16 and later took his life, so she didn't want her neighbours to go through the same thing that she did. So it was a positive outcome, as the police got Dean in touch with a third sector support group named Kids Company, and is working for his grandfather with Ellen as his support, as she knows what he's going through. So this policy alters how the police deals with the case, but in a positive way. Okay, so now on to the second question, which is demonstrate how government policies are developed. What is the process used to develop any policy? To start with, the policy is just an idea or ideology on how to change or manage a certain situation, whether that be the migrant issue or how to deal with a type of incident. But they need to have a reasonable source behind them, which are the public, the media, the public services, politicians or political views, or subject experts, which is kind of criminologists, pathologists, those sort of people. So it has 8 stages between being just a bill to being a law or policy. So to start with, the first reading happens, which means that the bill is made available to be read by the members within Parliament. Next is the second reading, where the MPs or peers discuss its main ideas and will vote if they feel it should go further. For the third part of how a policy is made is known as a committee stage, which basically means that it all goes to the committees, so not the houses within the Parliament, where they'll make changes which are discussed and then voted on. So next is the report stage, where the new changes or amendments, whichever one you prefer, from the committees goes to the houses, so the House of Commons and the House of Lords, and those who aren't in the previous stage. So they may assess that more needs to be done before it can pass, and we'll give examples on how to do that. So next is the third and final reading, meaning that the MPs debate and vote on the bill in its final form. Up until this last reading, the policy can go around and around in circles due to the changes put forward, so it can be a very lengthy process. Next is the House of Lords. The bill begins at the House of Commons, is approved, and then given to the House of Lords to be approved. If neither or one doesn't approve, it goes back to stage 1 for this policy. Okay, so final is the royal assent, which is basically just a fancy way of saying the Queen puts her signature in the signature box. And this is how they become a law or policy. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about the good and bad points within this development process. So one bad point, which is quite a big one, is that when it comes to this process, is the fact that the bill can literally just go around and around in circles for years without getting anywhere closer to becoming a policy from where they were at the beginning, which can be very time wasting, and quite a few people would feel that way. So I feel that if it goes around for maybe up to 3 times, it should be dropped so that a new bill can be introduced which perhaps has similar themes, just different on how the country will act on them. Although a good point of this kind of policy development is that it's discussed by a large group of people instead of just a few select people. Or when a dictatorship occurs, only one person chooses the laws that the country has to follow without discussion. So it is a benefit that our country has, that all of our policies and laws are well discussed. They are definitely not for the best interest. So it goes through all of the Houses of Parliament, and then it also goes to our monarch, which I think is a very good idea. Okay, so now I'm on to question 3, which is explain the impact of different government policies on a range of public services. So what effect does a policy have on a public service? What extra do they have to do? And does it change what and how they do their work? Okay, so again, I'm going to start with the nuclear deterrent policy, which obviously impacts the Navy as it takes up more money that could be invested elsewhere. Men who need to be on board the ships, like either actual soldiers to chefs and doctors, as these vessels are very important to keeping Britain safe from a nuclear threat, so these guys can be on water for a long time. The main way it impacts not only the Navy or even the public services but society as a whole is going to be the renewal of the nuclear armed submarines, which is supposed to go into act in 2028, although it's getting kind of discussed this year. Which will cost, they've said, to get it up and running 25 billion, but experts have come in and said that by the finish it will probably reach up to 100 billion. So the reason that it impacts society so big is that it will come out of the taxpayers' money, the majority of the budget. So some may question whether it's just a reason as ours is working fine now. So does it really need the renewal? And can it be money spent elsewhere? And that opinion or choice is yours. I'm not going to say anything about that. It will also impact society because it will create more jobs within the engineering sector and the design sector, as the Navy's engineers will be overstretched to create these new ships, whilst keeping up with the other 4 ships that they have to keep in rotation until obviously these ones are finished. And there are other ships which they obviously have to keep maintained, which will obviously put a major stretch on the Navy. It may also affect the other public services, as it may also cut into the budget given to them by the government, and budget cuts equals less jobs available and people being let go, so it is kind of similar. It has a benefit but a drawback at the same time. I feel that the victims of crime policy majority affects the police, as they have to set up meetings to see whether it's suitable or beneficial for the victims or the victim's family to meet, or whether it's a waste of time. But they will also have to deal with the proceeding afterwards, as everything needs to be recorded. And this is obviously because everything can be put against the defendant, especially within murder trials, because if they show no opinion, negative or positive, or they seem kind of detached from what they actually did, they could choose to title the defendant as criminally insane. And also, in some cases, paramedics are called to the scene, either before, during, or after, when they are openly reflecting on what they've done, as they might need to be kind of assessed physically to see whether they're okay. And that's for the victim as well. So if there's added strain on them, which isn't really needed, as they are quite outstretched to start with now. But I feel that society as a whole will benefit from this policy, as it will help everyone more openly speak about what happened, seeing as they would have all the facts instead of just one side of the story, and obviously they would view the defendant, depending on what they've done, as someone horrible. And actually, if the victims have spoken to them, then they'll understand more about why they did it themselves instead of hearing it from the police. Okay, so now I'm on to the fourth and final question, which is provide an evaluation of the impact of government policies on public services and the communities they serve. So I feel that overall the government policies are a good thing, but they do have their bad points. For society, they are a good thing, as many feel that the government keeps too much of our security and safety information away from us, which can lead to us feeling kind of extremely safe and untouchable, when in realistic terms we're not untouchable. But by bringing the UK nuclear deterrent policy to light for the public to see, shows that although we may not be untouchable by the countries, we have guards to help portray that we are to them, and we know that we are able to defend ourselves if it is necessary. I also feel that it benefits the Navy tremendously, as it is an actual project that people are aware of and that they can be praised for. But for the police and the rest of public service, it has its drawbacks, and as the regeneration starts, it's more likely to be messed of a budget for these guys, who will then be over demanded for how many people there are or how much they have. As for the victims of crime policy, I feel that it's beneficial for the police force, as it will stop the questions being directed at them and towards the perpetrator instead, which will lead to less time wasted for the actual police force. Plus, the police wouldn't necessarily know all the answers, so I think that's when people kind of take too much of a fact towards what they say, when actually they wouldn't know themselves, because they kind of have to put themselves in their shoes, whereas the murderer or the defendant is in their own shoes. Like, they know exactly why they did it, which is basically it, whether they meant to or whether it was just kind of wrong place at the wrong time. But for the other services, it won't have much of an impact on them, and this is why I feel that the government policies are a good thing. Okay, so that's the end of my video.